When they sent the letter threatening to tow my boat, I laughed. When they slapped a warning notice on my steering wheel, I started getting angry. But when I discovered the HOA president was secretly selling off our community dock rights to a private marina company, I decided to strike back with 74 eviction notices placed on the lake they didn't actually own. Hey, where are you watching this video from? Drop a comment below letting me know what state you're in. And while you're at it, tell me what you think about power-hungry HOAs. You won't believe how I made them pay. This is the story of how I turned a fight over a boat slip into an exposure of corruption that ended up on the local news. And yes, Karen cried when the police knocked on her door. After 20 years in the Navy as an engineer, I was ready for some peace and quiet. My wife Linda and I had saved diligently, and when we found a modestly priced home on Silver Springs Lake with dock privileges, we jumped at the opportunity. The previous owner had mentioned that the Homeowners Association was reasonable, mostly ensuring nobody painted their house neon green. What really sealed the deal was the community dock. I'd inherited a 24-foot fishing boat from my father shortly before he passed away. It wasn't fancy, just a simple fishing vessel that needed some love, but it represented the reconciliation between my dad and me after years of a estranged relationship. I'd spent months restoring it, and having a guaranteed spot to dock it was worth the extra $30,000 on the house price. The closing went smoothly, and on a crisp April morning, Linda and I moved into our new home. On the third day, I decided to check out the community dock where I'd be keeping my boat. As I approached, I noticed an older man in a faded captain's hat inspecting one of the moorings. "You must be the new owner of the Hendricks place," he called out. "I'm Dave Jenkins, but everyone calls me Captain Dave. I manage the dock for the community." Captain Dave showed me around, pointing out where the electrical hookups were and which slip would be mine. "Number 17, he said. "It's a good one, protected from the wind, but still easy to get in and out of." He mentioned, almost in passing, that there had been some changes in the HOA's leadership recently. "New blood can be good," he said, but something in his tone made me think he wasn't entirely convinced. That evening, we celebrated our first few days in our new home with a bottle of champagne on the back deck. Just as we were toasting to new beginnings, my phone pinged with an email notification. The subject line read, "Notice of boat regulations violation. Immediate removal required." I frowned as I opened the email. "Something's not right, Linda," I said, scanning the contents. "I've read every single regulation before we bought this place." The email was from Karen Peterson, president of the Silver Springs HOA, claiming my boat violated new regulations regarding size and appearance, approved at the last HOA meeting. According to these rules, boats larger than 20 feet were no longer permitted, and all vessels needed to be of luxury appearance and quality consistent with community standards. I pulled out our closing documents and found the dock usage agreement that clearly stated homeowners had the right to dock boats up to 30 feet in length with no mention of appearance standards. The document was dated just 6 months earlier. The next morning, I visited the HOA office with copies of my documents. Karen Peterson greeted me with barely concealed irritation, her highlighted blonde hair styled in an angular bob, wearing a cream-colored blazer over a silk blouse. "The regulations were updated at our meeting last month," she explained with rehearsed patience. "All homeowners were notified and had the opportunity to attend and vote." I placed my documents on her desk. "I've just moved in, so I wasn't notified of any meeting. More importantly, these documents explicitly state the dock usage rights, including the acceptable boat size." Karen barely glanced at the papers. "The HOA bylaws give the board authority to update regulations as needed for the good of the community. Upgrading the standards of our dock area will benefit everyone by increasing property values." "I'd like to see the minutes of that meeting and the official notification," I said. "According to the bylaws, any changes to established homeowner rights require a 75% vote of all homeowners, not just those who attend." Something flickered in Karen's eyes, surprised that I'd actually read the bylaws. I'll have our secretary email you the relevant documents. Office offered to check if any formal proposals had been submitted regarding changes to the dock lease. Frank nodded approvingly. I made sure when we set up the dock that the agreement with the city included protections against exactly this kind of thing. The lease states that the dock must remain a non-commercial community amenity accessible to all homeowners. We pieced together a troubling picture. Karen, along with HOA treasurer Greg Mitchell and a small group of newer residents with waterfront properties, appeared to be working with Davenport Marina Enterprises to convert the community dock into a private, upscale marina. The plan was to force out owners of non-conforming boats through arbitrary rule changes, then claimed that the dock was underutilized and would better serve the community as a revenue-generating premium facility. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined a plan to push back against Karen's scheme. Frank would compile all the historical documents proving the dock's legal status. Sophia would research the legal requirements for HOA rule changes. Captain Dave would reach out to all the boat owners who had received violation notices. Janet would check city records for any applications regarding the dock, and I would set up a secure online forum where concerned homeowners could coordinate our response. When Linda returned home, I explained what we'd discovered. "I'm proud of you for standing up to this," she said, "but I'm also worried. HOAs can make life miserable for homeowners who challenge them." I thought of my boat, not just a vessel, but a connection to my father and a symbol of the peaceful retirement I'd worked for. And this is about more than just our boat now. The following morning, I heard the rumble of a diesel engine outside. Looking out the window, I saw a tow truck with Johnson's Marine Recovery painted on the side, pulling into our cul-de-sac. I grabbed my folder of documents and hurried outside. The driver was consulting a clipboard as I approached. "Can I help you?" I asked. He looked up and nodded toward my driveway, where my boat sat on its trailer. "Got an order to remove an unauthorized vessel. Belongs to Noah Wilson." I identified myself and asked to see the removal order. He handed me a form that bore Karen's signature and cited emergency enforcement of community standards regulations. The date on the order was that morning, less than 48 hours after the initial violation notice. "Before you touch my property, you should know a few things," I said calmly, opening my folder. "First, this removal order violates the HOA's own procedures, which require a minimum notice period of 48 hours. Second, my boat is currently on my private property, not HOA common areas, so they have no jurisdiction to remove it without a court order. And third, I have documentation proving that these updated regulations were not properly enacted and are being legally contested." The driver hesitated, clearly not prepared for this level of pushback. "Look, man, I just go where they tell me. I don't want to get in the middle of a legal dispute." "I understand you're just doing your job," I assured him. "But if you remove my property based on an invalid order, you and your company could be liable for damages." As the driver stepped away to make a call, several neighbors came out to watch, including Sophia and Captain Dave. The driver's phone conversation became increasingly animated with phrases like "potential legal issue drifting over." Finally, he approached me again. "My boss says we're not touching the boat without clearer authorization." Just then, a sleek black SUV pulled to an abrupt stop behind the tow truck. Karen Peterson emerged, her face flushed with anger. "What's the delay? This vessel clearly violates our community standards and needs to be removed immediately." I stood my ground. The driver was just explaining that he can't legally tow my boat from private property without proper authorization, and I was explaining that your removal order violates several HOA procedures and state laws. Karen's eyes narrowed as she took in the small crowd of neighbors. "This is HOA business, not a public spectacle, Mr. Wilson. Your boat has been deemed non-compliant with our updated regulations, and as president, I have the authority to enforce those regulations." "I'd be happy to discuss this privately with you and the full HOA board," I replied, "along with my attorney and the documentation proving that these updated regulations were not properly enacted according to your own bylaws." Uncertainty flickered across Karen's face. Sophia stepped forward. As Mr. Wilson's legal representative, I should inform you that city permit, no environmental impact study, and certainly no approval from the homeowners for such major changes. That evening, our growing group met at Frank's house. Janet from the city records office brought troubling news. Someone with connections to the city council has been trying to expedite approvals for marina development at our dock, bypassing normal procedures by classifying it as a minor modification rather than new development. As the meeting was wrapping up, I shared a thought. What if we fight this where they're weakest? They're acting like they own the lake itself, but they don't. The water is public. It belongs to everyone, and that might give us a way to expose what they're doing in a way that can't be ignored. The next morning, Sophia, Captain Dave, and I met at a small diner outside our community. I laid out my idea. If Karen and Davenport were trying to claim control over lake access that wasn't legally theirs, we would use the lake itself to make our point. The HOA has limited authority over the dock structure, I explained, but they have zero jurisdiction over the actual waters of Silver Springs Lake. That's state-regulated public waterway. Captain Dave nodded enthusiastically. The lake water is under Department of Natural Resources jurisdiction. The state allows for temporary floating markers or signs for special events, as long as they're properly secured and don't impede navigation. Sophia cautioned, we need to make absolutely sure we stay within the law. No blocking access, nothing that could be considered a navigation hazard or defamatory. Over the next 3 days, working in my garage with help from Frank and a few trusted neighbors, I constructed 74 floating signs. Each consisted of a small buoyant platform supporting a 2-foot-tall stake with a waterproof sign attached. The message read, "Notice, attempted private securing of public waters. Silver Springs Lake is public property, not HOA property. The community dock is for all homeowners per legal agreement. Learn more, saveourdock.org." Early on a misty Saturday morning, our small flotilla set out. 6 of us in 3 boats placed the signs in a strategic pattern across the lake, concentrating them near the community dock, in front of Karen's waterfront home, and along the main boating channels. By 9 a.m., we had finished placing all 74 signs and returned to the dock. Sarah Chen, a reporter for the local newspaper who had been tipped off by Frank, arrived with a photographer. We gave her a full tour by boat, explaining the history of the dock, the current privatization attempt, and the legal issues involved. As the morning progressed, weekend boaters slowed to read our signs, and residents began walking down to the lakeshore to see what was happening. By noon, a sizable crowd had gathered at the community dock, sharing stories about their own interactions with Karen's restrictive HOA policies. I was discussing the dock agreement with some neighbors when a commotion drew my attention to the parking lot. Karen had arrived with Richard Davenport, Greg Mitchell, and 2 uniformed police officers. Karen stormed toward me. "This is vandalism. These people are defacing our community and spreading lies. I want them removed and arrested immediately." One of the officers held up a hand. "Ma'am, we need to establish some facts first." He turned to me. "Are you responsible for the signs on the lake?" I nodded. "Yes, officer. Those signs were placed in accordance with all state regulations regarding temporary markers on public waterways. They're properly anchored, don't impede navigation, and contain factually accurate information about public water rights." The officer asked for documentation, which I provided. Karen became increasingly agitated, demanding action and insisting that the HOA had authority over the entire lake area. The officer informed her that a Department of Natural Resources representative was already en route and had primary jurisdiction over the lake. Richard Davenport stepped forward. "Officer, I'm CEO of Davenport Marina Enterprises. We've entered into a development agreement with the Silver Springs HOA to upgrade their existing dock facilities into a modern marina that will benefit the entire community." Sarah Chen stepped forward. "Mr. Davenport, Could you clarify if this agreement includes provisions for restricting access to homeowners who currently have dock rights under the original community agreement? Davenport hedged. Well, any modern facility requires updated usage policies. That was taken care of. I just follow the work orders. I nodded sympathetically. I understand, but you might want to check those permits personally because I just got off the phone with the city engineer's office and they have no record of approved plans for this site. As the workers exchanged nervous glances, a black SUV screeched into the parking lot. Karen emerged, her face contorted with fury. "Stop interfering with official HOA business," she shouted, striding toward me. "These renovations have been properly approved by the board." "Board approval isn't sufficient for modifications to city property," I replied calmly, making sure my phone was still recording. "And according to the original grant agreement, this dock belongs to the city, not the HOA." Karen's composure cracked. "That's ridiculous. The HOA has maintained this dock for decades. Possession is 9/10 of the law." "Actually," came a voice from behind us, "that's not how municipal property works." We turned to see a woman in a city official's blazer approaching, accompanied by a uniformed police officer. "I'm Elaine Winters, Deputy City Attorney. We've received some concerning information about unauthorized development on city property." Karen's face paled. "There must be some mistake. The HOA has always had full control over this dock." Elaine shook her head. "I have the original grant documents right here, Miss Peterson. The city retains ownership of this facility, with the HOA serving as the managing entity subject to specific conditions. Conditions that appear to have been violated by your recent actions." The police officer stepped forward. "In the meantime, all construction work needs to cease immediately pending proper permits and approvals." Karen's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. Do you know how much money we've already committed to this project? Davenport has been paid a substantial deposit." The slip about the payment was damning. Greg Mitchell appeared from his nearby home, having witnessed the confrontation. "What deposit? As treasurer, I never authorized any payment to Davenport Enterprises." As Karen struggled to backpedal, I noticed Richard Davenport himself pulling into the parking lot. "Perfect timing." He approached our group with a confident swagger of someone accustomed to getting his way. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked smoothly. Elaine turned to him. "Mr. Davenport, I presume the city has some questions about your proposed development of municipal property without proper permits or authorization." Davenport's practiced smile faltered. "Our arrangement is with the HOA, not the city. If there's been some miscommunication about jurisdictional authority, that's hardly my company's responsibility." I stepped forward. "Is that why you've been secretly meeting with select waterfront homeowners, promising them premium dock spaces in exchange for supporting the conversion? Is that why construction began without proper environmental impact studies? And is that why," Greg added, his voice rising, "a $50,000 deposit was apparently paid to your company without treasurer authorization or board vote?" The confrontation was drawing attention from neighbors who had begun to gather at a distance. Davenport maintained his composure, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Any financial arrangements with the HOA have been properly documented. If internal HOA procedures weren't followed, that's not my concern." "Actually," the police officer interjected, "financial misappropriation of HOA funds would very much be your concern if you were knowingly involved." Karen's facade finally cracked completely. "You have no idea what it takes to maintain property values in a community like this. These improvements would benefit everyone in the long run. Sometimes, leadership requires making difficult decisions that not everyone understands immediately. Leadership also requires transparency and following the law," I responded, neither of which happened here. Elaine consulted briefly with the police officer before addressing the construction crew. "Please pack up your equipment. No further work is to be done until this matter is resolved." She turned to Karen and Davenport. "I'll need both of you to come to my office this afternoon to discuss potential violations of municipal code, grant conditions, and possibly state law regarding the misappropriation of funds." As they departed, Karen shooting daggers at me, with her eyes, Davenport maintaining a veneer of professional detachment, the neighbors who had been watching began to approach. Questions flew from all directions. What had happened? Was the dock safe? Would there be financial consequences for the community? Captain Dave, ever the calming presence, raised his hands. Folks, we're calling an emergency community meeting tonight at the clubhouse. Everything will be explained there, I promise. For now, just know that our community dock remains exactly that, our community. Correct overreaches and ambiguities with Sophia's expert guidance. We drafted clearer, more equitable rules that protected homeowners' rights while maintaining necessary community standards. The city formalized a new management agreement for the dock, acknowledging the HOA's role as caretaker while reinforcing public ownership and access rights. Captain Dave was officially reinstated as dock manager, with a proper contract and budget for maintenance. As for Karen, the legal consequences of her actions unfolded gradually. The unauthorized payment to Davenport resulted in charges of financial misappropriation. The investigation revealed that she had stood to personally benefit from the marina conversion through a hidden consulting arrangement with Davenport's company, a clear violation of her fiduciary duty to the HOA. 6 weeks after our lakeside confrontation, I received a call from Elaine Winters, the deputy city attorney. I thought you'd want to know, Mr. Wilson. We executed search warrants at Davenport Marina Enterprises this morning. The evidence we found suggests this wasn't their first attempt at this kind of scheme. What do you mean? I asked. Apparently, they've approached HOAs in at least 4 other communities with similar conversion proposals. 2 actually went through with it, resulting in homeowners losing access to community amenities they'd paid for through their HOA dues. Your community's resistance may have stopped a much larger operation. The news made the local paper the following day. Sarah Chen's front-page article detailed the broader implications of what had started as a dispute over my boat slip. Local and state officials were now reviewing HOA regulations to provide greater protection against similar abuses of power. The most satisfying moment came the following week when I watched from my kitchen window as police cars pulled up in front of Karen's house. The officers knocked politely but firmly. When Karen answered, her face crumpled as they presented her with what appeared to be a warrant. As predicted, Karen cried when the police knocked on her door, not from remorse, I suspected, but from the humiliation of being held accountable, perhaps for the first time in her life. That evening, Linda and I sat on our back deck watching the sunset over Silver Springs Lake. My boat was safely docked at Slip 17, where it belonged. You know, Linda said, when we moved here, all you wanted was a quiet retirement. I laughed. So much for peaceful lake living. She squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. You stood up not just for yourself, but for everyone here. That's the man I married, always fighting the good fight. I nodded toward the community dock where several neighbors were chatting as they prepared their boats for the evening. It wasn't just me, it was all of us together. That's what makes a community work, people willing to look out for each other. Still, Linda insisted it took someone to spark the resistance. Don't underestimate what you started. As dusk fell and lights began to twinkle around the lake, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past few months. What had begun as a simple defense of my right to dock my father's old fishing boat had evolved into something much more significant, a reclamation of community values and a reminder that shared spaces require shared vigilance. The sound of laughter drifted across the water as a family returned from an evening boat ride. This was what we had fought for, not just access to a dock, but the right to enjoy our community as equals without artificial barriers or exclusionary policies. The battle against Karen's marina scheme had revealed both the worst and the best of community living. It had exposed the dangers of concentrated power and lack of transparency, but it had also demonstrated the strength that comes from neighbors united in a common cause. In the end, we hadn't just saved a dock, we had rediscovered what made Silver Springs special in the first place, the people who called it home. The summer sun sparkled on Silver Springs Lake as boats of all shapes and sizes gathered for the first annual Community Dock Festival. From sleek powerboats to humble fishing vessels like mine, from kayaks and canoes to a few modest sailboats, the diversity of watercraft reflected the restored diversity and inclusiveness of our community. The dock itself had undergone a genuine improvement project, not the commercial conversion Karen had planned, but thoughtful upgrades that enhanced accessibility, safety, and enjoyment for all residents. Captain Dave, now officially employed by the HOA with a proper contract and fair compensation, directed boat traffic with cheerful efficiency, his captain's hat tilted at a jaunty angle. Frank Thompson maneuvered his ancient pontoon boat alongside mine, where I was set